What happens when the very children you sacrificed everything for begin to treat you with coldness, mockery, and disrespect? Imagine sitting in your own home, hearing their laughter turn sharp, and realizing you have been erased in their eyes. But what if one powerful decision could turn the silence, the pain, and the disrespect into a moment that changes everything? Stay with me, because this story will reveal how one mother rose, and how you too can reclaim respect before it is too late. The evening sun slipped through the blinds, casting long, sharp lines across the living room. Margaret sat at the edge of the couch, her hands trembling against her lap. The laughter of her children echoed from the kitchen, but not the warm kind she remembered. It was sharp, dismissive, and filled with a tone that stung deeper than any silence. Her eldest son leaned against the counter, smirking, his voice cutting through the air like glass. "You do not get it, Mom. Times are different now. You are just old." The words struck her chest, stealing her breath. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her dress, the room spinning for a moment as if the world itself had tilted. She looked at their faces, faces she once kissed goodnight, faces she once held after nightmares. Now, those same eyes looked at her with impatience, as if she were a burden instead of a guide. Her throat tightened. The clock on the wall ticked louder, heavier, as if it too mocked her silence. She wanted to shout, to remind them of the sacrifices, the nights she stayed awake with worry, the meals she skipped so they could eat. But her voice cracked before it left her lips. Her youngest daughter rolled her eyes, scrolling on her phone as though Margaret's pain was invisible. A chill spread across her body, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. It was not just disrespect. It was erasure, as though she no longer existed in their world, except when they needed something. She stood slowly, her knees weak, but her presence tall. For the first time in years, she looked at her children not as the fragile souls she raised, but as people who had forgotten the weight of love and sacrifice. Her gaze sharpened, piercing, her silence heavier than any words. The room shifted, the laughter died. They felt it, the sudden, unfamiliar gravity of her authority. And in that moment, Margaret realized something terrifying. Respect was not lost. It was taken, and she would have to take it back, one powerful step at a time. Margaret's breath steadied as she stood, her frame casting a long shadow across the room. Her children shifted uneasily, exchanging glances, unsure why the air had suddenly grown so heavy. The silence stretched, thick and unyielding, until Margaret's voice finally broke it. Low, steady, yet carrying a weight none of them expected. "You believe I do not understand," she said slowly, her eyes fixed on each of them in turn. "But I understand more than you think." Her son scoffed, but the smirk faltered. There was something in her tone, something unfamiliar, something that demanded attention. Margaret straightened her shoulders. For years, she had bent herself to fit their moods, their tantrums, their demands. She had given and given and given until they forgot what it meant to truly value her presence. But now, a fire stirred inside her chest, a fire born from the sting of their words and the ache of years spent unseen. The first step came unbidden, as natural as breathing. She walked to the center of the room, her hands no longer trembling. "I am your mother," she said firmly, "and I will no longer allow disrespect in this house." Her words were not shouted. They were not coded in anger. They were calm, deliberate, and final. Her children blinked, as if hearing her voice for the first time. The eldest shifted, muttering something under his breath, but Margaret did not flinch. This was the beginning of her boundary, the invisible line she had never drawn before, and now it was etched in stone. She realized in that moment the second step was already forming inside her heart. She would no longer beg for their kindness. She would command it by example. Her gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "Respect begins with me, and I will show you what that looks like." Instead of raising her voice to match theirs, she lowered it, choosing composure over chaos. The shift unsettled them. They were used to her bending, breaking, retreating. But not this, not the woman who stood tall before them. The air seemed to thrum with something new. Her daughter lowered her phone slightly, eyes narrowing in hesitation. Margaret caught the movement, and with a breath, she pressed forward into the third step. She reclaimed her role, not as their servant, not as their silent protector, but as the leader of her home. "You may have forgotten what I have done for you," she said, her voice steady. "But I have not forgotten, and I will remind you, not with words, but with actions." Her words painted images in her mind. Nights spent rocking fevers, mornings where she left the last piece of bread untouched so they could eat, years of working double shifts to keep the lights on. She would no longer allow those memories to remain buried beneath their dismissal. Her life was proof of her strength, and strength demands acknowledgement. The clock ticked again, but now it felt like a drum, beating in rhythm with her resolve. Her son finally spoke, his tone softer. "So, what do you want?" Margaret stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. "I want respect," she said. "Not as a request, as a truth, and it begins now." The fourth step revealed itself in that moment. Respect was not begged for, it was taught. She would teach them, not by scolding or endless lectures, but by living the example of self-respect so fiercely that they could not deny it. Already, the energy in the room was shifting. Her daughter set her phone on the table, her face tinged with guilt. Her son looked away, his jaw tight, but no words of mockery followed. For the first time, they saw the steel in her eyes, and it unsettled them. The fifth step grew in her chest as she exhaled. She would stop, seeking their approval. For too long, she had mistaken compliance for love, silence for peace, sacrifice for gratitude. But she saw now that true respect would only come when she respected herself first. She would invest in her own strength, her own joy, her own life, so that they would see her not as someone fading, but as someone rising. Her hands unclenched, her shoulders lifted. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves listened. Her final step unfolded like a revelation. She would not punish them with anger. She would not drown them in guilt. She would invite them back into respect through love, firm, unwavering love that demanded accountability. She spoke again, her voice calm. "You may choose to ignore my words. You may roll your eyes, you may laugh, you may even resist. But from this day, I will no longer play small. I will no longer sit in silence while you treat me as less. You will see me as I am." Her children were silent. The air, once filled with sharp laughter, now held a weight that pressed against their chests. Her son's smirk had vanished. Her daughter's phone remained untouched. Margaret stood in the middle of her home, and for the first time in years, she felt it. The shift of power, the reclaiming of dignity, the undeniable force of respect beginning to return. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. This was not the end. It was the beginning. And as her children stared at her in stunned silence, Margaret understood that regaining respect was not a single act. It was a journey, one she had just begun to walk. The room, once filled with noise, now carried only the sound of her steady breath, a breath that promised change, a breath that promised strength, and a breath that her children would never forget. Margaret held her ground, her body upright, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The silence pressed against every wall of the room, as if even the furniture braced itself for what came next. Her children, once so quick with laughter and sarcasm, now shifted in uneasy stillness. Margaret did not rush to fill the quiet. For the first time, she let it stretch, let it carve its weight into their hearts. The power of presence, she realized, was stronger than any lecture. Her son finally cleared his throat, his voice breaking the tension. "So, you really mean it this time?" Margaret turned her gaze to him, sharp yet calm. "Yes," she said, "and you will see it in everything I do from now on." Her words carried no anger, only truth, and that truth hung in the air like stone. Her daughter looked down, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. It was a small crack in her armor, but Margaret noticed. Respect was not immediate. It was shaped, slowly, like clay pressed into form. She took a step closer, her hands no longer trembling. "I will no longer argue with you," she continued. "I will not fight to be heard. I will speak once, with clarity. If you ignore me, that is your choice. But I will not repeat myself." Her tone cut through the air. It was not raised, yet it held more strength than any shout. Her son shifted, his jaw tightening. The usual retorts lingered on his lips, but he swallowed them back. Margaret caught the hesitation. It was the first sign of change. The clock above the mantel ticked louder, each second marking the shift in power. She walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The fading light of evening spilled across the room, bathing everything in soft gold. The world outside moved as usual, cars passing, neighbors chatting. But inside her home, a new chapter had begun. She turned back to them, her expression steady. "I will invest in myself again," she said firmly. "Not just in you, in me. Because when I respect myself, you will learn to respect me." Her daughter finally raised her eyes, curiosity flickering through the guilt. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Margaret's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "I mean, I will no longer spend every hour cleaning up after you. I will no longer cancel what matters to me because you demand something trivial. I will show you what it means to live with dignity. And if you care to notice, you may learn from it." The words sank deep, piercing the fragile wall her children had built around their arrogance. Her son glanced away, but his silence carried weight. Her daughter pressed her lips together, the glow of defiance slowly dimming. Margaret walked past them, not in retreat, but in command. Her footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floor, each one measured, deliberate. She moved to the kitchen table and rested her hand upon its surface, steady as stone. "This house will change," she declared, "not because I asked for it, but because I will live differently. If you rise to meet that change, good. If not, the distance between us will only grow." Her words struck like lightning, brief, sharp, unforgettable. The air seemed heavier now, and her children sat frozen, as though unsure if they had just witnessed the beginning of a storm or the dawn of a new order. Margaret did not wait for their reply. She had learned that respect is not begged for. It is built, day by day, action by action. Her eyes softened, but her back remained straight. "I love you," she said, her voice warm yet unwavering. "But I will no longer accept less than respect." It was a truth sealed in her heart, and her children felt it. The room, once filled with mockery and noise, now breathed with silence and reflection. Her son leaned back, his bravado drained, while her daughter sat still, her phone untouched. For the first time in years, Margaret was not invisible. She was undeniable. And though her children said nothing, though no apology left their lips, their silence told her what she needed to know. The ground had shifted. The balance was no longer theirs to control. Margaret exhaled deeply, the fire in her chest burning brighter, stronger, unbreakable. This was not the end of her struggle. It was the beginning of her rise. And as she stood in the golden light of the fading day, she knew her children had seen something they would never forget. The moment their mother reclaimed her respect. Margaret lingered by the window, her silhouette framed in the last glow of twilight. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. Her children sat still, their usual chatter absent, their laughter silenced. For the first time, they were forced to confront her strength. Margaret turned, her voice low yet steady. "Tomorrow will not be the same as today," she said. "I have drawn the line, and you will see it in every moment." Her son shifted, his eyes darting to the floor. The arrogance that once lived in his voice was gone, replaced by something he rarely allowed himself to feel: uncertainty. Her daughter glanced at her brother, then back at Margaret, her lips parting slightly as though words were forming, but none escaped. Margaret's gaze softened. She did not wish to crush them. She only wished to awaken them. "You will learn," she continued, "that love without respect is not love at all. I raised you with love, but now I will raise you with truth." The words cut deep, deeper than any scolding. Her children felt it, the weight of her calm, the authority in her stillness. She walked toward the table, pulling out a chair. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, almost ceremonial. She sat, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. Not a command, not a plea, an invitation. Her son finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "So, what do you want us to do?" Margaret held his gaze, her eyes steady, unwavering. "I want you to remember who I am," she said. "Not as a servant, not as someone you take for granted, as the woman who gave you life, who deserves your respect as much as your love." Her words landed with the force of thunder. Her daughter swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I am sorry, Mom." The apology was small, fragile, but it was a start. Margaret did not rush to accept it. She only nodded, her silence holding more power than any reply. Her son said nothing, but the stiffness in his shoulders told her the seed had been planted. Respect was not reclaimed in one evening, but it had begun. And as Margaret sat in the dim glow of the fading day, she knew that tonight marked the first step of a transformation, not just for her children, but for herself. The next morning, the house carried a different rhythm. The usual rush of slammed doors and careless words was gone, replaced by a quiet awareness that lingered in every corner. Margaret moved with calm purpose, her steps light, but her presence unshakable. Her children watched her more closely now, their eyes cautious, as if they sensed the change was not a passing mood but a new way of life. At breakfast, her daughter hesitated before speaking, her tone softer than usual. "Mom, do you want me to help with the dishes today?" It was a small gesture, almost clumsy, but Margaret felt the shift beneath it. Her son, silent at first, pushed his chair back and muttered, "I'll take out the trash." Margaret nodded gently, not with triumph, but with quiet acceptance. Respect was not reclaimed in a single night. It was built slowly, through consistency, through unshaken boundaries, through the strength of self-respect. She understood now that the power had always been within her, hidden beneath years of sacrifice, buried under silence, waiting to be uncovered. And she had uncovered it. Her children were beginning to see her, not as someone fading into the background, but as the anchor of their home. As the sun rose higher, filling the kitchen with light, Margaret allowed herself a smile. She no longer felt invisible. She no longer felt erased. She had stood tall, she had spoken truth, and she had reclaimed her place. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a stronger one. A story where respect and love walked hand in hand. A story where her voice would never again be silenced. And as Margaret looked at her children, she knew that they would never forget the day their mother rose and showed them the true meaning of respect.